I have a wonderful author with me. He's either called Billy Brown or Bill Brown, depending on your point of view. He was Billy as a child, but I guess I'm going to have to call you Bill now, aren't I?
You are, indeed.
Which, you see, I've spent the day reading the book, and because I do like to prepare, and I'm going to think of you as Billy, I'm afraid. The book is called I'll Tell Your Mother, and we've all had that said to us, haven't we? And just to give you a little bit of a flavour of what the book is about, it's essentially all about Billy's childhood in the late 1940s, early 1950s, in the aftermath of the Second World War. He's a kid growing up in South London, and you were a bit of a scamp, weren't you?
I'm afraid so. School I didn't get on with at all, hence the publishers have put my school report in the book, which is a delight for some readers, but out on the streets a different ballgame.
And what gave you the idea to write this book? Because, I mean, it covers how many years?
Only up to the age of 16.
Yeah, because it reads actually as if it's actually a lot shorter than that. I mean, it starts at the age of 7. I actually thought it was sort of all concertinaed into about 3 years, but I didn't actually. And I have read it, I promise you. I didn't realise it went right up to 16.
No, it does go up to 16. It was much longer to start with, but the editors loved the ending and wouldn't lose it, so hence we are up to 16.
Now, so what gave you the idea of doing it?
Basically, my two children have been nagging me for years to write my life story because I've had a brilliant life, and they know something of my childhood, but not all. So when the opportunity came up to go on the Alan Titchmarsh show for the People's Author competition, I had a go. And out of 1,000 entries, I came second.
Well, that's not bad, is it?
Not bad going. But I was approached straight afterwards by England's top literary agent, who signed me to a contract, and very nicely, Orion took up the option to publish me.
Very strange, though, to do it straight into paperback, isn't it? Because it's a $6.99 paperback. I'm a publisher by background. I would have done this in hardback to start with.
It is in hardback.
Oh, it is?
It is. But I think the hardback goes out to book clubs and people with a short leg on their piano.
And people like me who won't have paperbacks on their shelves.
But, but you're just a purist.
I'm just a snob. Now, you say in the book, and particularly in the conclusion of the book, you had an absolutely ideal childhood. You pay great tribute to your mother, as we all should. Do you think your childhood was fairly typical of in South London in that time?
I think it was. Not so much the wheeling dealing part, because that was just in me and the way that I'm built. But most children had a very similar childhood to me. We respected our parents, we respected the local policeman, and excuse me, although I was a scamp and a scallywag, if our local constable, whose name was Collins, if Constable Collins came along and said, "Billy Brown, what you up to?"
Colin Collins, just to prove that I have read the book.
When we found it. If he said, "Oi, you, get off home," we went. Because his word was law, absolute. And if you didn't go, he'd tell your parents, especially as he lived in the same block of flats as I did.
I mean, that was the one thing that really came through to me, this sense of community where you were living in a block of flats. There were several other blocks around you.
400 people.
And there was this tremendous sense of community.
Oh, very much so.
You all knew each other.
Very
you got
much
involved
so.
in each other's lives. And I suspect, I mean, I don't know whether the blocks that you grew up in still exist, but I suspect that it's not like that.
But the community spirit has long gone.
Just to tell people where it is exactly.
It's in the Guinness Trust buildings in Brixton, South London. And when I was a little boy, everyone knew everyone. We had ladies who had lost their husbands in the war, so there was an awful lot of ladies who needed a bit of help, a bit of support.
There were a couple from the Boer War.
There was. In the flats, there was a special purpose-built block of one-bedroom flats just for war widows. And a lot of them came from the First World War. Tiny little old ladies that everyone looked after because we were a community.
And one of the anecdotes or one of the chapters that I liked best was when the whole of the 4 blocks went out on a day trip to Sheerness on... Sheerness on Mud, as you like to call it.
Sheerness on Mud. Yeah, that was the annual general outing, and we'd been to, been to various places like the Margates and the South Ends, but this time it was Sheerness. And we had a special train, went from Loughborough Junction, and the guard on the train lived in our flats. And I think there was about 670 odd people went, and it was just the thing that you did.
But it wouldn't happen now, would it?
Wouldn't happen now.
I mean, if David Cameron's Big Society means anything, it's that sort of thing that people need to get back in their lives, I guess. The real sense of belonging, the real sense of community that there was in that era.
It would be very nice to think you could go back to that, but sadly I think Mr. Cameron's ideas are a bit of let's save money here and there where we can. But in those days, it was just the community spirit of it all. We didn't have a lot, but we didn't need a lot.
Now, you were born in 1942, and even, I mean, I was born in 1962, so I'm 20 years behind you, but even when I was growing up at school, there was the shadow of the war.
Oh,
I mean,
yeah.
I can remember
Yeah.
people running around the playground shouting, "We won the war in 1964," which was a bit of a historical inaccuracy. But virtually every film on television was about the war.
Oh, of
Now,
course.
in 1949 to sort of in the early 1950s, I mean, it must have been that in spades.
Oh, very much so, very much so. Because the government of the day wanted to rebuild Britain, and the way to do it was to stir the population into this wonderful we shall all stand together type thing, which is what actually happened. And it was just the most brilliant time to be a child. It was wonderful for me.
In what way?
Well, because my parents were working, I was let loose basically, and we had acres and acres of bomb sites, and although we shouldn't play on them, of course you can't stop children, and it was like adventure playground but on a grand scale. And then of course I realised that the bomb sites were a source of revenue for me.
Well, but Bill, everything was a source of revenue for you, it seems.
It was. It has been all my life, actually.
I mean, you were the Alan Sugar of your day.
Not bad, not bad. I mean, by the age of sort of 8, I had my first business selling firewood and horse muck, and it went on from
As
there.
you do.
And by the time I was 10, I could virtually get you anything you wanted because the rationing was on. I mean, rationing didn't finish in England till 1954.
And just explain for our younger listeners exactly what rationing was. What was rationed?
Rationing was everything that was in dreadful short supply. You had to have coupons for it. So you'd take your little book along to the butcher's and he would snip out 2 coupons and give you 3 sausages and probably a tiny bit of scrag end of lamb, and that was your ration for the week. And at certain times, it was 1 egg a week. So if you knew a man that had a few chickens in his backyard and produced eggs, you could sell them for a nice profit, which I did.
Now, one of the things that you also did was it somebody that you knew called Tosh? He'd bought some stuff from one of the government auctions, and it turned out to be 100 tins of treacle and
That's it.
molasses.
Destined for some naffy.
And he hadn't got a clue what to do with it. And basically, you sold it within 30 minutes.
Yeah.
I mean,
Because-
how did you
well,
do that? And how old were you then?
I'd have been 10.
10.
But luckily, the geographical layout was perfect. Excuse me. My flats were at the top of a road called Somerleyton Road, where all the new West Indian immigrants had been housed when they came over for the big recruiting campaign to drive the buses and
Yeah.
the trains to replace the young men we'd lost in the war. At the bottom of Somerleyton Road, which was Cold Harbour Lane, was this wonderful XWD shop where you could buy anything the War Department didn't want. And they existed right up to the 70s and 80s, and there are still some around. So you bought cases of stuff unseen at auction and took a chance. And just it happened that this time it was full of tins of treacle.
Now, just take us through one or two of the scams that you took part in. Is scam the right word? You were
Opportunities.
It was an opportunity because you were creating the supply to meet a demand.
Quite
I guess,
right.
in most of what you did. How did you first of all get into it? What was the first thing that you did to make money?
Oh, firewood. I managed to get myself a Saturday boy job, and I was coming up to 8. But I've always been tall, very tall for my age. I mean, as you've seen, I'm now 6'5", and I was always very tall, so I could get away with just a little bit more. And the guy who ran the yard, a chap called Mike Gallagher, who was an Irish giant, he knew I was lying, but he didn't really care because I had the cheek. So he gave me the job, to bundle up firewood on a Saturday for 2 and 6pence for the Saturday's work. And that's when I learned about supply and demand, that people needed firewood.
And what came after the firewood?
After the firewood came horse muck, because all the lawns in our flats had been dug up for the Dig for Victory campaign. So there was 100 allotments. All the gardeners wanted horse muck. In the late 40s, 50s, we still had quite a lot of horse-drawn traffic. So horse muck was easy to find, and they would buy it for 6pence a bucketful.
And what was your breakthrough deal? What was the most lucrative one that you had in the early years?
I should think, really, sort of scrap metal was good. I suppose the biggest thing I ever sold as a small boy was the tins of treacle and syrup. 100 tins of it, which I got 5 shillings a tin for, which was a fortune then. I was actually earning more than my father.
Well, you're listening to the LBC Book Club with me, Ian Dale, and Billy Brown. Bill Brown. I keep calling you Billy.
I don't mind at all.
You don't mind? Okay.
I don't.
I'm going to call
I take
you
it as a term of endearment.
Well, indeed, and it is, because he's written this most brilliant book, and it's a very cheap book as well, $6.99 in paperback. It's called I'll Tell Your Mother. And if you were a child in the late 40s and 50s, I guarantee that you will enjoy this book. Now, we're going to talk to Billy again in a couple of minutes, but we're getting reports that President Gaddafi is about to make a statement to the Libyan people, and we will, of course, bring you that when it happens here on LBC 97.3. The time now is 9:45. And you're listening to the LBC Book Club. We've been talking to Duff Hart-Davis, the author of The War That Never Was, and I'm currently talking to Billy Brown, who's written a book called I'll Tell Your Mother, and it's a memoir of his childhood, really. And Billy, one of the things that comes through right throughout the book is the importance of your mother.
Oh, very
in
much
your childhood.
So. Very much so. I mean, everyone likes to say, mine was the greatest mum ever.
No, mine was.
Exactly.
Is.
But mine actually was.
No, I have to correct you.
But I can prove it. I've written a book on it. And there's this lovely thing with my mum, is that she never hit me once. I can never remember the cuff round the ear roll or smack on the leg.
I wish I could say the same. My mother will be listening now. I remember every single occasion.
Mine was slightly more painful, though, because she knew that I was making money with the black market, basically. She fined me. So if I lost a satchel or a cap or whatever it was, because I hated school, I used to get a new satchel and just dump it as soon as I could, she would fine me. So she'd take like 2 shillings for a cap and 5 shillings for a satchel. Or if I really misbehaved and was disgraceful, she'd halve the contents of my money box and take the lot. But I never argued with her because I couldn't. I knew I was in the wrong, and it was a firm and fair punishment. But she protected me all the time. Rarely did she tell my father, because he had enough things doing, going to work for a living, and she rarely told him. And she used to say, now, this is between you and me, Billy Brown. And that's how it was. Hence, the book is actually called Billy Brown, I'll Tell Your Mother. You have to say it properly.
I do apologise, I didn't
Not a problem.
say it properly. And at the end of the book, you then reveal what your mother did with all that money. But maybe you shouldn't reveal that.
Maybe I shouldn't.
No, maybe you shouldn't, actually, because it's probably best to read it as encouragement to buy the book.
Yeah.
But
every lady who has read it has said, wasn't your mum lovely?
I know. Well, I'm going to be
book?
honest with you. Right at the end, I mean, my eyes were a bit moist. It doesn't take a lot to make
Good,
it
that's
happen,
what I like
to tell you.
Yeah.
But your father as well plays an important role in your childhood. And there is a degree of hero.
He was my hero.
Well, I was just about to say, a degree of hero worship of him.
Absolutely. My dad was a brilliant, brilliant man, and he'd had a form of polio as a young child, and he had to wear the calipers and all the rest of it. So when war broke out, he didn't get called up for the army because of his medical condition. So he was in reserved occupation, making munitions when the old Hoover factory went over to making munitions during the war. And he was the air raid warden in our flats. But he was a brilliantly fair man. I love him to bits, obviously, and love the memory of him, but he was my hero. There was no doubt about it. And some of the things that he used to do, I mean, the account in there of the trip to the theatre.
Well, that was hilarious. Go on, tell us about that. That really was very funny.
Well, we were. He actually repaired someone's steel shutters in the market. A man who had a lot of influence and a lot of money. And as a thank you, we got 4 tickets to the theatre. He didn't know what the show was until we turned up. And when we turned up at the Camberwell Palace, which a lot of your listeners will remember, it was a large variety show, but in the centre of the show was a nudie review, which had transferred from the old Windmill Theatre. And I was 9.
And it was the making of you. Go on.
Oh, definitely, most definitely. But the best part of all was, apart from the top of the bill, which was Max Miller, there was a lady on the show called Joan Rhodes, who was billed as the world's strongest woman. And she did the usual thing, got people out the audience, and one of them was my father. And my father was the only one to tear a telephone directory in half and break a 6-inch nail.
She got more than she bargained for.
She
didn't
did.
she? And
But the only reason he could do it is that although he'd been poorly as a small boy, he was also a blacksmith. And this is how it had all, come to be, that he had this amazing upper body strength and, stole the show.
how did your childhood prepare you for later life?
I think what it did, schooling didn't do anything for me, and any of the readers who buy the book, the first photograph is my school report.
There's very little about school, actually, apart from the fact that you were a complete failure.
No, I hated it. I couldn't get on with school at all.
I was a complete swot.
But moving in Brixton as a small boy, and shall we say sharper than the average, I met so many people who actually taught me what life was about. And the guy that I worked with first, Big Mike, he always told me to shake on a deal and stand by it, and stand by your word, which I've always carried out throughout life. When I met a black gospel minister, he taught me it's nothing to do with the colour of your skin, it's the person inside. And that's what it's all about. And all these people contributed to my young life. Some of them maybe not for the good, but it was what life was about. And I learnt an awful lot about people, and it stood me in good stead when I went in the fire service.
And you learnt quite a lot about girls, particularly Beryl.
Oh, well, Beryl, it's like everyone. Everyone has their first sweetheart who they never forget. And Beryl was mine, and she was the prettiest girl in the flats and hated me, or so she told everyone. And every time she came across me, she would say, "Billy Brown, you're horrible," or she would tell me off for having dirty shoes or getting up to mischief. But in the end, she became my sweetheart. So it was lovely.
But there's a bit of a sad bit towards the end of the book where you're parted.
I'm afraid so. And it was actually on Coronation Day that she actually broke the news to me that she was going with her parents to South Africa. And 3 weeks later, she actually went. There were so many people emigrating, of course, for a better life, South Africa, Australia, Canada, that Beryl's parents were among those, and of course she had to go with them.
Now, I can imagine this book being made into a rather good TV series.
So can I.
Is it happening?
We're not sure. But if there's anyone out there listening who would like to meet the real Just William, then buy my book. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, you see, I'm not sure this analogy with Just William works, because, I mean, Just William, wasn't he a bit posh?
A little posh and a little reserved.
Roy, I don't think you could ever describe you as a child as reserved.
Oh, I don't think so at all.
Are you intending to write a sequel?
The brief for this book was 80,000 words. I submitted 192,000.
So you're a publisher's worst nightmare. I have authors that do that. And they don't like it when you then slash it down again. But how long did it end up? That's about 80,000, isn't it?
That's about 80,000 in that book. So the rest of the words submitted were my teenage bit, the formative years of rock and roll and girls up to my 16th birthday.
You see, I think we'd like to read about that.
Well, it's there, plus there have been other sort of tentative inquiries. I was in the fire service in London for 21 years, and I've been told it would make an incredible story, because I wasn't an ordinary fireman. I was in charge of specialised rescue.
Right.
So I served on the Moorgate Tube train disaster and things like that.
Well, I mean, you've proved you can write. And did you actually enjoy the writing process?
I loved it.
Because if you enjoyed it, then surely you've then got to write another book.
I absolutely loved it. It was like opening a tap. And luckily, my partner Jane used to work for Reader's Digest in the book production. So I write, Jane corrects all the spelling, and we are a team.
Well, I think it's a team that's produced an absolutely wonderful book. Because
Thank you so much.
You got my imagine. I mean, the key, I think, for any successful book is you've got to grab the reader within the first 5 pages. And you do that about 5 times in the first 5 pages. And, I mean, this is not a book that I would normally pick up in a bookshop, to be honest, because I like reading sort of political stuff. But if you wrote a sequel to this, I would buy it, and I can't say fairer than that.
That's a wonderful recommendation. Thank you so much.
Well, the book is called Billy Brown, I'll Tell Your Mother. Did I say it right?
Perfect.
And it's by Bill Brown. It's published by Orion Books. It's in paperback at $6.99. And our previous guest before 9:30 was Duff Hart Davis. He wrote a book called, or has written a book called, The War That Never Was, the true story of the men who fought Britain's most secret battle. It's a fantastic story about the Yemeni War of the 1960s. That's published by Century in hardback at $14.99. Next week, I'll be meeting Toby Harnden. He's the America editor for the Daily Telegraph, author of Dead Men Risen, the Welsh Guards in Afghanistan. Coming up next is Clive Bull. This is LBC 97.3.